Hello, my name is Mel Skahan, and I'm an enrolled member of the Yakama Nation located in central Washington. I first became interested in Bigfoot or most of the cryptids at an early age, being told stories by my great grandfather, my great grandmother, and my great great grandmother. And so it didn't grow from there. It was just childhood stories. And it wasn't until my adult career in forestry that I really began to really step into this these forest people that are out there. I mean, they found me. I didn't go looking for them when I was out in the woods. There they were, and ever since it's been close to 35 years now.
Well, let's go back to those early stories that you heard from your relatives. What type of stories were they telling you?
there were there were a lot of stories that they would relay to us, and a lot of them at that time figured as a kid that they were just like, all right, we're gonna go outside, or we're out camping, we've been out fooling around all day as kids, just creating a ruckus and everything. And my great great grandfather was a fabulous storyteller and legend. I mean, anything that he saw that was passed on to him, he would give to us. And one that he always would tell us about was the first introduction of the white settlers in this area, and how the Yakimas, the forest people, and then even the little people, the little stick Indians, would live together. And we moved together, we fed together, we celebrated together throughout, you know, generations before the arrival and migration into the Pacific Northwest. And we were really comfortable with each other, and we all depended on one another to gather, to hunt, to build. And so when the settlers started moving over this way, they would, bring things that were never seen. And, we never had pots, pans, iron, aluminum, or, metals, and the wagons and so forth. And so the Yakos became curious. And when more and more would show up, the Yakimas were the ones that would come out of the woods and go down and greet them. And they would bring back, you know, the trinkets, the candies, everything that was new to us at that time. And then the relationship between the forest people and between the little people kind of, it put a damper on everything. And as more and more would come, and the more and more Yakimas would go down, and then they would settle with them, live amongst them, and then forget, you know, to go back up or to let's say be part of that group dynamic again. And so it was decided by the little people and the forest people that the Yakimas would, if you continue to live this way, then you could go down and be amongst them, but you could not be part of us anymore.
So, how did you interpret that? What was your takeaway from that story?
Well, I mean, even to this day, it still rings bells when you have your neighbors that come in, and it takes a while for you or friends that when you go out to meet new people, that you got to watch them. You got to study them. You got to learn them. Is this something that I want my family, my other friends, to be part of? And so, taking a while to get to know folks before just jumping right in and introducing them to your circle. is what I always take away from that every day.
So how do you think that this applied to the overall bigger picture of the community of Sasquatch or Bigfoot and in humans as they had communities that were very different than, say, the more primitive wildlife of the Bigfoot Sasquatch people?
Well, connections started being lost, not with, you know, all three groups were connected to the earth. They knew when, where, and how to travel to get to the areas in order to thrive, continue to live. And with the disruption that took place, um, you know, it was easier to settle with what was there and have things brought to you rather than go out to try and partake of the land, as you know, as we still do as tribal people on the Yakima. You know, we have our first foods, we have our first kill ceremonies, our first catch ceremonies, and so some of those traditions have been passed on through the generations yet, but the loss of the innocence towards the growth of the land at that time is what separated us from our other two groups.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can see that to be true. So you progressed on, and you indicated that when you got involved in the forestry industry, and tell me a little bit about your background, your job, and then how that migrated over into a deeper interest in Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Well, once I got the taste of being outdoors all summer, because my grandparents, my great grandparents would take us out to the woods and we would stay there for the summer. He taught us how to fish. He had taught us how to know the berries, the roots. And so as a kid, I enjoyed it, being along the rivers, learning how to fish, read the water, the weather, you know, when to, you know, go out, when to stay in, and develop that oneness with everything around you. Because once you get that, oh, how do you put this? Once you hone your mind to everything around you, you're connected with it, and then you begin to learn from that and grow. And that's one thing that I lost after my younger years and getting into the teenage stage, and just losing touch with everything that was taught to me because of outside influences, other, you know, meeting other folks, and then just not going back out. But once I graduated from high school, I got into the outdoors, forestry, and then began to fall in love with it, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I grew up not on the reservation learning my forestry trade, but off the reservation with the Forest Service. And there, I was in Skamania County, and that was at that time one of the hotbeds in the 50s and the 60s for Sasquatch sightings. And so people knew about it, but when I got into the forestry industry with the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, nobody wanted to talk about it if something had happened. And you rarely, well, almost zero really, were told stories of other forestry workers that would have some type of strange event to them while they were out. And occasionally I would catch a whisper, and but it wasn't until I became a wildland firefighter and almost running into my first forest um, person in Central Oregon on a wildland fire. And then after that, things started to grow towards my curiosity of wanting to learn more. And it did once I was working alone in the woods on the Gifford Pinchot on the west side of Mount Adams here in Central Washington, and having the smells, having the, you know, the hearing odd things that weren't associated to animals, and having that strange feeling of being followed and watched. And so it just grew from there.
How many incidences would you say that you've had that you feel like that there was a Bigfoot in any way present in your environment?
Oh, geez. I would say I was having at least 100 to 150 accounts every year. Not all in the same location, but when I would return to a location, I would remember what, when, where everything would happen. So I would be alert, more alert when I would go out. And then the environment started changing because, in my forestry career, we did my job. I was working in pre-sales and I was a timber cruiser. So I was collecting forest data as far as volumes and species. And we were using those calculations that I was gathering to um, put together a harvest plan on what timber typings needed to be entered and so on, and what needed to be treated and what we were supposed to stay out of because of environmental concerns. And so when I would go out alone, I would hear the birds whistling, and then the birds would stop, and then all of a sudden, then I knew that was something was around that changed the frequency of everything because then I started having the hairs on my arms rise up and then became more alert and would sit and listen to hone in on where those sounds are coming from. And there would be wood knocks that I would hear. I would hear the distant howls. I would hear the whistles. I would hear the whoops, and I hear the rocks clacking. So I mean, I pretty much well experienced everything that they you hear about in other people's stories, except for the the aggressive encounters. I've never been full on screamed at. I've never had big rocks or logs thrown at me. So I think they kind of knew who I was. And, when I would go out, I would introduce myself. My name's Mel Skahan. I'm only here for a little while. And I would let them know who I was and why I was there.
Did they ever show themselves to you physically?
I've had the opportunity to see them a few times, but chose not to. I had one follow me that I knew he was there, and I took uh, a different route through a lot of thicker underbrush so that I could see the brush move if he was following me. And so I trudged ahead through it and made it through the opening, and then I found about 100 to 120 feet further down, another clump of trees that I waited by, and I waited for him to come through, him or her, and it took about 15, 20 minutes before it finally decided to continue to follow me. And then I was watching the brush and I was watching the treetops move back and forth. And I was like, oh, here you go. It reminded me of the movie King Kong when King Kong is coming through the trees and you see the trees move back and forth. And I was watching those tops just move ever so slightly as he was moving through. And then I moved and then I changed my direction and I went up the hill and then it stopped. And when I got to the top of this rock outcropping, I went away from out of view from that shrubbery tree area, and then waited about 30 minutes because I took a lunch, and then I came, got ready, and I went back over, and I started looking down, and then I started seeing the trees move again, and he was moving towards me up the hill, and I was waiting for him to step out in the open. And then I was like, no, I can't. I don't feel like seeing you today. And so I let it know that I'm done. I said, I'm leaving. I'm walking back to the truck, which is up the hill, and I'll be back later to finish this area. And it's events like that when you know that they're around, and you have that opportunity to see them, but you choose not to. But one time I was with a coworker, and he was the one that seen it first, and it was on his side of the vehicle because we were in a truck going out to the job site, and he spotted it first, and then I backed up, and then as I backed up, we got into view of him again, and he was standing right next to a tree with his right arm extended out, and like he was propping himself up against the tree, and he was standing as still could be. As my coworker told me that he was in the same position as he was when we drove by, and he knew he had been seen. And once we came back and got into his view again, that's when he dropped his right arm, took a couple of steps with his right foot, and then um, began to run away from us. And then that's when I seen him full. He was a male. He was, I think we calculated somewhere around 7.5, just a little bit over 7.5 feet tall. And he had a stride that started out that was just merely inches because he was turning. But when he started moving away from us, and as he got faster, we had a stride of almost 11 feet. And he was really booking it to get out of there. And so I got to see him for at least under 10 seconds as fast as he was from his backside running away from us. And then he turned to his right. And then I saw the shoulder movement as he was running. And then he got out of sight. And then I got out of the truck, and then I started tracking it. And then I started doing the measurements of the stride as I tracked him when he left us, and then he went over a steeper embankment, and that's when we left him alone.
So have other people had experiences in that same forested area that you know of?
Oh yeah, yeah. Every everybody that I know has had an encounter with Sasquatch out on the Yakima Reservation, down from people recreating camping to a lot of the forestry workers, and then even the loggers and the log truck drivers.
It sounds like a lot of activity out that way.
Yeah, I've got over 1,200 reports over my time on the Yakima Reservation.
What are some of the more interesting reports you've heard?
There was one that we did an investigation. A lady had come. We had heard about a forestry lookout, and she had a full-on sighting early one morning. Um, she was up there for somewhere around 8 days and then off for three and then come back up. And they left her without a vehicle. They didn't want her driving away from her post because she was up there to watch the wild, look for lightning strikes or fires. And so she developed this relationship that she didn't know that she first started smelling them coming around the cabin that she was living in up there, and then she would hear the distant howls and screams and the whoops, and then she would see partial prints around the cabin or around the front door driveway, and then she says that she never seen them during the daylight hours because she was up in the tower most of the day, but she saw all the other wildlife that was present: cougars, bears, deer, elk, and so as time went on, the smells, the howls, the screams. She, a close coworker of mine, would go up and pick her up and bring her back down, and she would show her the footprints. And he was even drinking out of the water tank that was up there. He would open the valve, and though he they wouldn't close it. They would leave the valve open, and then it would drain all her water. Then they would have to go back up and fill it back up for her. And so she was telling her about all these events over the weeks, and then she was going to be going on vacation, and then she had a bunch of the tall grass around the cabin, and she goes, "Well, can you guys come up here and pick my pull these weeds for me?" And she made note of it and let her supervisor know. And when she'd been gone on her vacation and she came back, her weeds were pulled, but they were piled up in front of the door, on the door and the front step. And so she thanked the lady for them doing it. They go, "We never did that. Nobody came up here. We didn't have the time." And so, and then they saw the big footprints, and the size of these prints were enormous when we did our investigation up there. Um, and so she would feed elk off the side of the cabin. She had two doors, one that faced east and another one that faced south. And she would go to the east door and lay an apple out to feed an elk that she popped open the blinds early in the morning to let the sun in and everything. And that elk was standing right there and scared her. So she put that apple out every morning for it. And so the day of the sighting, she heard the rustling going on outside. She thought it was her elk. And so she was like, she told us, she goes, I'm gonna scare this elk this time because he scared me the last time. So she went over to the front bay window facing to the east, and she popped that blind open, and then there, standing not more than 10 to 15 feet away from her, was a male Sasquatch, and he was black, peppered colored, meaning that he was white, silver, black, and he was a big, broad male. And he was looking up at the time she pulled the blinds open. And if you stand in a position that it was standing, we believe it was looking up at the tower. And then when she opened the blinds, then it focused its attention on her, and they were both staring at each other. And she said that she couldn't move. She tried to scream, she tried to run, and she couldn't. She was just like nailed to the floor. And so they were looking at each other, and then after a while, it raised its arm up, and then it did this wah, wah, and then turned away from her and started walking towards the east. And she was watching it as it was walking away. And then when it got out of view, then she was able to move, and then she went running into the back room. And in the mornings, we have a helicopter fly the reservation to do checks for um, uh, any starts in the early morning, looking for smoke. And so she heard the helicopter. She had to run back out, grab the radio, and then diverted the helicopter over towards where she was at. And then the helicopter landed, and then she came out and she began to tell the story, what was going on. And then they sent somebody up to come retrieve her. And then that's when um, my partner got the call to go up and do the investigation on this because they didn't know what was going on. So he went up there, he found the tracks, and he followed the male that walked away from the cabin, and it jumped 30 feet down this rock embankment and then landed, created a huge slide, and then continued on to the north. And then that's when he stopped following it. He came back up. He was going to cast the best tracks that were located in front of the cabin, so he had it all ribboned off. And she began to tell us after she came back, because they gave her a couple of weeks off. She began to tell us if we noticed anything strange about the way that one walked. And my partner relayed to me that, he was finding one footprint. He wasn't finding two clear, or both feet. He wasn't finding both left and right. And he was only finding one side. And so as she was telling the story, she goes, "Did you notice that it had a problem with its right leg?" And then my partner looked at me. He goes, "That's why I couldn't find the right print because it had an injury and it was not putting a lot of pressure on it." And so he goes, "What about the other two?" And she goes, I only saw the one." He goes, "Well, I found two other tracks that were up there on the other side of your cabin. Uh, the first one was a 22-inch track. The second one was an 18-inch track. And the third was a 14-inch track." And she said, "Nope, I didn't see the other two. I just saw the one." And so she she was always told that by her relatives because she was going to be a fire lookout up there, living up there all by herself because nobody else was allowed up there. And she had no electricity and she barely got any signal up there with the cell phone at the time. And all she had was the work handheld radio to make any communication with anybody. And she was probably the best witness to see something up that close.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I can imagine that could be a little frightening, but also very interesting to have all those incidences happen.
Yeah, yeah, and it put everything together for her that what she was looking at was enormous, and what well, and so where it was standing outside, there was a tree that was next to, and my partner and I went back up when she pointed it out to us where it was standing. Then we went up, and it was just an inch under 10 foot tall.
Wow, very, very large.
Yes.
So, what advice would you give someone if they happen to end up in that vicinity where all of this Bigfoot activity is happening? What advice would you give them?
Well, what I've learned over my time is that, respect is the biggest thing. I've done many investigations on the reservation and off the reservation where people go out to celebrate too much, be too loud, be obnoxious, and nobody wants an obnoxious neighbor. For a couple of hours or even for a weekend or for, if it's a hunting camp, maybe even for a couple of weeks. And, you treat the land the way it is supposed to be treated. And just go out and be respectful of everything. I always like to introduce myself and give them my intentions. I introduce my family or anybody that is with me. And you develop that relationship because once I project those thoughts out to them, they will pick them up and they will respect you more once you treat the area the way it's supposed to be, as it has been in the past.
It seems like there is a coexistence that can be there if one identifies that you're living very different lives, but you can coexist on this land.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we've changed the landscape and everything, and they've adapted. Being a forestry worker, I've seen heavy timber cutting, some clear cutting going on the Forest Service sections, sides of our reservation, and they have to adapt at the changing landscape that is going around them because that you once had this nice little highway going through this spot. Now you go through use this highway to move back and forth, then you're going to get spotted by something, so you're going to have to divert around, and it takes about 15 years for the trees to grow back into about a 6 to 8 foot um, height to create that hiding cover that all animals and all Sasquatches need to to be able to move around without being seen.
Do you feel like they stay there all the time, or do they migrate from one area to
The one that was spotted at Signal Peak up on the Yakima Reservation, he moved around. He had a big roaming area because I collected a lot of stories about him because he for his size, he stood out. And when I saw the prints I've seen the prints many times of him, but I never knew his height because I never did see him. But then once we got the height and everything, that kind of, if anything else would come up about him, I would know, and I wouldn't release a lot of the details of my investigations to other people, and because they came to you for a reason to try, to tell their story and be trustful that, you wouldn't, share a lot of things about them because, you know, sometimes it took years for people to come to me about things, and so this one he had roamed south about 35 miles and then he had gone southeast about 28 miles. So he had a large roaming. He moved around all over the place, and I don't know if as far as migration out of Washington State to the eastern part of Washington or to the western part of Washington. I don't know anything about that because I never collected any stories about uh, that one only within the Yakima Reservation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate all the stories you've had to share today. It's just a wealth of information up that direction. Seems like a lot of activity happening, um, and would encourage people to continue searching and looking for Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever, and continue to share stories with us. So I appreciate you coming on today and sharing yours.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you for inviting me. And it's just there. I always tell people if you want to learn, just and if you're just getting into this, find somebody locally that you can trust and share the wealth of knowledge that they have because it takes a long time to gather all this information and to get to where I have trusted them to my encounters in Washington, Oregon, California, even in Utah. It took a long time to get to earn their respect.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on today, Mel, and I'll let you know when this comes out.
Okay.